Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to be discussing some advanced strategies for spell selection in the game of Frostgrave 2nd Edition. Hey everybody, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, the channel that plays tabletop games using toy bricks and blocks and discusses the rules and strategies that build the foundation for those games. In Frostgrave 2nd Edition, spell selection is the most important part about creating your wizard. The spells you choose will affect everything from strategy and playstyle, which soldiers you hire to fill your warband, how you'll upgrade your wizard over time in a campaign, and the character and feel of your wizard. This video will be focusing on effectiveness and efficiency in your spell selection over theme or story elements, and to do that I will be looking at where to start with spell selection, covering your bases, some other considerations, and going beyond power gaming. So let's get to the bricks and blocks of spell selection for Frostgrave 2nd Edition. The first thing you'll want to do depends on your familiarity with the game. If you're new to the game, I suggest starting by just choosing a wizard school that looks interesting, then picking spells that sound fun to cast, and try to keep most of your casting numbers between 8 to 12. And if you are new to the 2nd edition of Frostgrave, I have a new player series that's linked in the description box below that lays out everything you need to know to get started in the game. But if you're an experienced player or have read and understand the rules, then instead of starting with choosing a wizard school, I would suggest choosing one spell, or possibly two that might combo together or complement each other. If they're in the same school, like Embed Enchantment and Enchant Weapon, you'll know which school you're going to study. If they're from different schools, like Mind Control and Heal, you'll want to find a school that keeps the casting number of both spells low. Viewer Ira Al Thor sent me the link to a spreadsheet he created that I've linked in the description box, which can aid you in selecting a starting school when you've got two spells you want to use that are from different schools. For instance, if you really want to use spells from the opposed Elementalist and Illusionist schools, you select those two schools from the drop-down menu, and then you look at the list of schools below. This area shows the penalties you'll have to cast Elementalist and Illusionist spells from those schools. It also has a combined number in a color-coded box that shows the combined penalty for the two schools. So in this example, Necromancer and Witch are the worst schools to use your combination of spells. And you also wouldn't want to choose either Elementalist or Illusionist, as you can't start with spells from their opposing schools. And the other 6 schools, while all having the same combined penalty, vary in that each of these have either Illusionist or Elementalist as an aligned school, and the other one as a neutral school. Once you've chosen your key spells and the wizard school that works best for casting those spells, there's a few different ways to fill out the rest of your spell list. From a purely game mechanic standpoint, the most practical way to do this is to choose spells that cover a variety of different situations and aspects of the game. Viewer Nathan Hook, who's also a blogger that frequently posts on the Frostgrave Facebook page, shared a blog post with me. And in this, he discusses a few bases or gameplay aspects that you'll want to cover with your spell selections. He recommends selecting spells to cover the following areas. Personal defense, which would be like Elemental Shield or Beauty to keep your spellcasters safe. Attack, which would include direct damage spells like Destructive Sphere, or it could be debuffing spells like Curse, and he also lumps Imp in with this. Magic damage, which could again be direct damage like Elemental Ball, or something indirect like Enchant Weapon, but having some means to damage enemies that are immune to non-magical damage. Healing, which would be Heal, Steal Health, or Familiar, which he groups into this category to keep your spellcasters alive. Buffing spells like Shield or Possess to power up your soldiers. Area control spells, which could be Telekinesis, Leap, Mud, or anything that can manipulate movement around the battlefield. Counter magic, like Dispel or Spell Eater to cancel your opponent's spell effects. And investments. These are primarily out-of-game spells that can provide extra experience points, items, or gold crowns, or anything that provides free or temporary soldiers to save you some money on soldier recruitment. Nathan also points out that some spells can cover multiple bases and that some wizard types won't have access to spells that will cover all of these areas. And as such, he discusses some other ways to cover these bases, either with soldiers that can fill these roles, items you can purchase, or the way you upgrade your spellcasters during a campaign. And you might find other bases you like to cover as well, like movement, control spells, or knowing your enemy, specific counters for common playstyles in your playgroup. Another benefit to looking at spells this way is it prevents you from doubling up on spells with similar effects. For instance, Plague of Insects, Furious Quill, and Blinding Light all cause negative effects to their target, and choosing all three of these would probably be redundant. Sometimes it might be beneficial to double up though if two spells are in the same category but have slightly different effects. Maybe you want to focus on direct damage, so you could take Elemental Bolt for single foes and Grenade for when your enemies are grouped together. One important thing to keep in mind no matter what method you use to choose your spells is casting numbers. Anything over 12 can be fairly unpredictable, especially for your apprentice who subtracts 2 from all their casting rolls. So if your only ranged attack spell casts on a 16, you might want to add archers to your warband to provide some reliability to that part of your strategy. However, since empowering spells is always an option, especially if you have reliable forms of healing, high casting numbers might not be as much of a problem. Since casting and attempting to cast spells gives your wizard experience points, it's beneficial to be casting something every turn. Having a buffing spell like Strength, Fleet Feet, or Elemental Hammer are good for this purpose because you can usually find a friendly ally in range to cast these on during any point in a game. The size of your playgroup is also an important factor when choosing your spells. There are a number of spells in Frostgrave that are very situational and require your opponent to employ specific strategies for those spells to show their worth. Spells like Banish, Control Undead, or Call Storm fall into this category. In a campaign with multiple players, there's a higher likelihood these spells will find an opponent to work well against, which keeps them balanced. But if your games are always just you and the same buddy, a lot of these spells become either completely useless or extremely powerful. For instance, if your friend is using a summoner or a necromancer, there are certain thaumaturge builds that can completely decimate their strategies. So in a campaign with a small player count, you might consider outlawing some agreed upon spells before you start. One other thing to note about situational spells is even if you know the spell and you never cast it, just having it in your arsenal can affect your opponent's strategies. If they know you have access to a spell like Destroy Undead, that could discourage your opponent from ever bothering to learn Raise Zombie from a grimoire they just found. While the purpose of this video is to help players synergize their spell selection and maximize their options, some players might not be into the power gaming aspect or might be looking for some ways to mix things up. Though I won't go into detail in this video, some ideas to help players do this are to choose spells to go with a specific theme like weather and nature, creating an out-of-game expert, or basing your selection around a character from a story. Or if your playgroup is growing tired of certain spells, you could restrict specific spells or do some sort of spell draft. I'm curious how you like to build your wizard, whether you usually start with a school or with a spell, and if you focus more on power or theme. And if you've ever played in a larger group, what are your thoughts about situational spells? Also, I'm curious if anyone out there has played using a spell draft, and if so, what method did you use and what were your thoughts about it? You can leave your responses to these questions or anything else in the comment section below. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to click like, add a comment, or subscribe so you can keep up with all the content that I'm releasing. And with that, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, and I'll see you on the next video.